G'day, I'm Alister from LearnDelphi.tv and welcome to this presentation on refactoring in Delphi, the art of code despaghettification. A term I have borrowed from astrophysics. Spaghettification is where you fall into a black hole and get stretched out by the tidal forces. So I've kind of borrowed it, and it's probably a very unpleasant experience. Likewise with dealing with spaghetti code. So we're going to look at how you might convert some spaghetti code into straight pasta. A little bit about me. I'm an Embarcadero MVP, have been for quite some time now, and I maintain the LearnDelphi.tv website. I think I have about 207, 208 videos on there presently, all on programming in Delphi. And I started that in about 2006 or so. And I've been programming in Delphi since version 3, although I was programming, dabbling in Pascal before that. I'm also an author. This is my first book, Code Faster in Delphi, which is available now. You can get it from my website, learndelphi.tv. There'll be a link on there. And hopefully by the time you watch this, my second book will be available, Code Better in Delphi, but no guarantees. My contact details are probably the best way to contact me is through LinkedIn, and I'm Alister on LinkedIn. So what is refactoring? Well, it's, as this bullet point says, improving code without changing its behavior. And it's the process of changing rather than the change itself. So it's a systematic process. So you follow a recipe, and these recipes are called refactorings. And there are about 60 or 70 refactorings listed, and you can get there's a catalog here. This is not a complete reference, but it is the list from the refactoring book. So if we look at extract method, it's now called extract function. This is now all in JavaScript. It used to be in Java, all the examples, but that's still not too bad to be able to convert those examples into Delphi. And there's often a reverse. So extract function or extract method, the reverse is inline function. So many refactorings have an inverse. A lot of the refactorings can be automated. So there's tools in the compiler and in third-party products that allow you to do refactorings on your code in an automated way, which can greatly reduce the errors and what have you. It greatly helps if you have automated testing. This has not been the case for me in most of my career. I've been working with large legacy applications, and generally legacy applications don't have automated testing. And one of the things is that try and introduce a little bit of it, but it's generally just kind of only a small amount of the code gets automated testing. And legacy code is really does not lend itself to writing tests for. And you might do refactorings not just in terms of improving code, but it might make making other changes a lot easier. So how did it all start? And where did this refactoring come from? So really, it's always been around. The term refactoring was first used in 1990 in an article, but it's been done formally. There's I think extract method has been documented in like Fortran and other languages. So it's been around for a very long time. But the book Refactoring, Improving the Design of Existing Code by Martin Fowler, this is kind of what brought refactoring out to the masses. Now, I've read this first edition twice. I have the second edition sitting on my shelf, and I've referred to the first edition a lot. It's on my to-do list to read the second edition just to see if there's sort of any slightly more modern techniques on how to do the process. There's been almost 20 years since between editions, and it is a really good book. And I do in my code Better in Delphi, which hopefully will be available soon. I do go into some refactorings in that as well, but not quite in the same level of detail as we're going to explore in this video. Now, I'm not directly going to talk about code smells in this talk, but I thought I'd mention it because you'll come across it in the literature if you're reading up on refactoring. And it's basically patterns in code which lend themselves to certain refactorings. Now, different smells suggest different types of refactorings. It might be you have a large method, and so you might use extract method to break that method down into smaller, more manageable chunks. and reduce the size of the method overall, which is something we're going to be doing in this talk. And it's always a good idea to keep an eye open for them when modifying code, because that's a good opportunity to clean things up a bit. And I've got this little sort of bad code has code smells, and that leads to lends themselves to refactorings, and you end up with better code. What can refactoring do? Well, obviously, it improves your code by its definition earlier, but we can improve readability and maintainability. These are quite important, and also testability. So lots of abilities there. And over time, you can improve architecture. It also allows you to reduce the complexity of your code, and you can begin to remove technical debt, although often this takes a very long time to make any real progress on a large legacy application. So there are a lot of different refactorings. As I mentioned earlier, there's sort of 60 or 70 odd. We're going to start by covering introduce explaining variable, and rename you just generally do all the time because coming up with names is hard, and often you need to change them as the code changes. Having good names for things can make code a lot easier to read. Extract method, it's another one we're going to look at. Allows you to break down larger methods into smaller chunks. And extract method object, not covering this one, but mentioned it here because it's very powerful if you're dealing with legacy code. If you have a very large method or procedure, you can actually convert that procedure or method on an object into an object of its own. And then as you extract methods from it, they become additional methods on that class. And yeah, it just allows you to do a bit more manipulation and hold all those refactorings together in one place, in one object. And of course, there are lots more. The first refactoring we're going to look at is replace conditional with guard clause. And let's take a look at that now. This first piece of code is a very simple routine, which takes a couple of file names, a JPEG and a bitmap, and just converts JPEG to bitmap. So nothing exciting. And if I look at blame, we can see that it was last changed in 2007. So this code has not been modified in quite some time. It's probably being used somewhere. Now we can start by removing these redundant brackets, like so. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to reverse the condition on this if statement. So if we have a look at the structure, we've got an if statement and then a begin end for that if statement that covers that basically all of the code. So I'm going to reverse that and say exit false, and we can then get rid of that begin end and drop that indentation down a little bit. And we don't need that anymore either. So that was a very simple change. But what we've done is we've reduced the indentation a little bit. And generally, I find the more you can reduce the indentation, the easier the code is to read. So that's only an indentation of 1, but you can imagine a situation where you have a much larger function or procedure that has a bunch of these if then begin, if then begin, if then begin, and you end up with this being indented, say, 3 times. And you then convert that to three guard clauses, and you've eliminated a whole bunch of indentation, which is irrelevant and just noise. And they can make reading code a lot easier. Occasionally you'll have a else bit at the end of the if statement, and that's easy enough. So this is your else code goes in here, which in some respects is not ideal because you really want your good case, the normal path of code, to be the easiest to follow through. But the guard clauses do allow you to skip down to the more interesting bits. So that was our first example, replace a conditional with guard clause. And we've somewhat simplified the logic and reduced the indentation, both of which make the code easier to read and maintain. Now, the logic isn't actually simpler, but the layout of the code is easier to read. particularly if you are familiar with guard clauses and can spot them pretty readily. Our next example is introduce explaining variable, and we do this to make the code more readable. So let's take a look. Again, this code was modified, written 15 years ago, so don't judge me by this code. So back in 2007. So this time we are going to come down to here, and we see we've got this lovely comment. If we want to scale down only, and the image is smaller than the bounding box, don't scale it at all. And then we have this if statement. So what I'm going to do is we are introducing explaining variables. Take that expression. And also that bit of code. Your semicolon, and you don't need these extra brackets anymore. So let's eliminate those. Okay, and then we take a look at this comment, and we see that all of this bit of comment is redundant because it's now been explained by using these two local variables. So let's grab that, and this is probably now better suited being about there. So that was fairly straightforward and simple, and I quite think inline variables are, a brilliant use case for doing explaining variables. It makes it very easy. But let's see if we can. Let's add those using Control-Shift-V to add them as regular variables at the top here. Now I'm doing this because the refactorings in Delphi, automated refactorings, do not like inline variables. And we'll see that shortly. But in the meantime, we'll come down and we see we've got this very simple expression. This is not a refactoring I would normally do, but a way of doing an example. Come up to the refactoring menu, and we can do introduce variable. And Delphi will think for a moment as it analyzes the code, and hopefully won't crash. I do not trust the refactorings in Delphi anymore, unfortunately. Hopefully they'll be fixed in a future release. And so I'm just going to give it a name, and I'm going to say replace both occurrences and go OK. So we've created a new width not 0 and assigned it, and it's being used there and here. Now, if I go bar there, for instance, and eliminate that one, and we do the same with new height, I go up to the refactor menu, and we see declare variable is no longer available because it does not like this inline variable. And likewise, the right-click and refactor, same problem. But you may have noticed we have Model Maker Code Explorer installed, and I can come down to add and add explaining variable, which is Shift-Alt-L. In fact, what I should do is do the shortcut. And you can say, no, it's not an integer. Let's say Boolean, and we want to replace both occurrences. New height is not 0. In fact, let's make it new height not 0. I've obviously done this before because it's automatically come up from one of my rehearsals. So it's done exactly the same thing, except without the big weight. And we might want to just eliminate these now redundant brackets. So that one's not a refactoring I would normally do, because it's the expression itself is fairly self-explanatory. But it's served as an example. That was my example of introduce explaining variable, and basically take an expression, very commonly in if statements, but sometimes it could be part of a mathematical calculation or something like that, and you can break it down into some component parts, and you might do one or more explaining variables. Quite often it's more, because simple expressions often don't need them. In Delphi, we've got the refactor menu and then introduce explaining variable, and in Model Maker Code Explorer, it's from the MMX menu, add explaining variable, and the shortcut Shift-Alt-L or Alt-Shift-L if you prefer. And it's quite nice in that it can replace multiple occurrences. So quite often, if it's just in one place, it's probably just as easy to do it manually, or otherwise, if you've got multiple occurrences of the expression, then use the automated tool. And of course, it has a reverse, and it's called inline variable or inline temp. So in Delphi, there are quite a few automated refactorings. Let's have this menu here, and I typically use rename, gets used all the time, extract method quite frequently, declare variable, and in fact, mostly I use the keyboard shortcuts, and I've been using a lot of Delphi XE8 lately on a project, and I've been using a lot of these shortcuts. But since inline variables have become a thing, it's broken many of these refactorings, which is why I have mentioned Model Maker Code Explorer, which you can download from this location. And it has lots of refactorings and generally quite a lot of tools for manipulating code. And there's a lot more than I'm going into in this video, but extract method, extract property, extract interface is what we're going to be using. The rename is not quite as good as the one in Delphi because it'll only do it within the current unit, whereas the rename, the Delphi rename refactoring will do an entire project. And it will do, if you do say a component on a form or something like that, it will handle the updates to the DFM files as well. Class templates, edit entity, that's very, very helpful. We'll be looking at that. And yeah, lots and lots of other things. It's a very powerful tool and very much worth learning. So our next example is a very trivial extract method, but we'll be looking at the various ways we can do that. Here we have some very simple example code. And in fact, this bit of code here comes from refactoring.com. I've just translated it to Delphi and added a bunch of extra code just to make it compile. And what we're going to do is we're going to extract these two lines of code into their own procedure in a process called extract method. And we're going to use this hint, this comment, to indicate what we should call the method. And it's quite common that you'll come across code, there'll be a comment, and for a block of code, and that comment will sort of tell you that it's a very good candidate for extracting into its own method, or in this case, procedure. So, but if we have a look, we also see there's name, which is a global variable, and outstanding, which is a local variable, which means we're going to have to add this as a parameter, and that's easy enough to do, like so. And we can then, instead of having this comment, we can call our new method with its parameter, and then I could shift those two lines of code, and everything quite happily compiles. Now that was not too onerous, fairly quick to do, but you might, for a much larger block of code that's been in amongst lots of indentation and confusion, this process might be a lot more difficult. So I'm just going to hold down undo, and instead we're going to use an automated refactoring, and we're going to start by using the refactoring in Delphi if it works. So from the refactor menu there is extract method, or Control-Shift-M, and I'll try that. No, not going to work. So we'll do it from the menu, and we give it the new name of print details, and it's found the variable name for us. And there we go. So that was that refactoring done. But as you saw, the refactoring is what doesn't always work. So particularly if, say, I made this an inline variable, and now when we go up to the refactor menu, it's completely grayed out, so not available at all. So instead, we can use Model Maker Code Explorer again, and it has extract method, and you can see it's in the main menu, which will give you an indication as to how frequently you should probably be using it, although it doesn't have a shortcut key associated with it. But when we give it its name, print details, and we also see that it's not picked up on the type, so we can add a new type. And I've done this refactoring before, so it's remembered our parameter, and somewhere in here it should say what we want to do with the previous code. And there's lots of options that you can customize, and I'll just go OK. And we no longer need that comment, and it's left in the extracted code, which we can remove. So that was also handy. It's also added some bookmarks. That is extract method. We undo that again, and yeah, look out for comments in for blocks of code. They will indicate good candidates for doing extract method on, and will often indicate what you should call that method. And quite often, if you're working with particularly nasty code, you might not even be able to work out what that code does initially. And it might just be you have to do a lot of refactoring on it to clean it up to work out what the code does, and then you can probably undo all that refactoring, and you have a better understanding as to the best code changes to make that method much easier to modify. So in the previous example, we replaced a comment with a method and extracted some code out. And we used the comment as a hint for what we should call that method. And this is extremely common. I've done this many, many times. Now, we can take advantage of the automated refactorings in both MMX and the Delphi IDE. Now, doing a lot of refactorings manually can involve lots of typing. It's obviously slower and often more prone to error. But it gives you the most flexibility if you want to extract things as functions and stuff like that, and sort of customize the parameter list and what have you. But using the IDE, or the automated tools in general, it's a lot faster. You're less likely to introduce errors, although sometimes the refactoring will cause problems in themselves. But the IDE refactorings, when they work really well. So, well, most of the time, I've had problems with older versions of the IDE. Maybe I couldn't tell you which one. Probably Delphi XE6 or something like that. Would miss off parameters and local variables and things like that, but nothing too disastrous. The refactorings in the IDE also often project-wide, so they can have far-reaching effects and can save a huge amount of search and replace, and will update DFM files as well. Now, the refactorings in Model Maker Code Explorer, it says here less constrained by the IDE, so it will allow you to do extract method, perhaps in some places not very appropriate for that. There's a lot more options in it, but you are more likely to have to fix things up, but will work in more circumstances. And unlike the IDE, they're generally not project-wide, so you're limited to the current unit. So let's now look at a more advanced version of extract method. For this next example, we're going to be looking at some production code again. And we have this download from realestate.co.nz. And now realestate.co.nz is obviously a website in New Zealand that has properties for sale on it. And this routine here, for a particular property on that website, it will download all the details, including the photos. So it's fairly straightforward. There's a bunch of it's kind of, there's three parts to it. There's a sort of a setup, it's a, do you really want to do this, an overwrite, that kind of thing. And then there's the actual updating of data, just kind of down to there also. And then we have the downloading of photos, and then just cleaning up after that. So it's slightly longer than our other example, and we can immediately see we have some commented out code, and this is a very common anti-pattern. I should mention this code, I think goes back about to 2012, so about 10 years old. So it's been modified a few times since, but never really cleaned up. So really commented out code. It's in source control. If I really wanted to get it back, I could get it from there. Obviously, I was not overwriting stuff. If the address was already present, then we didn't want to overwrite it with a new address. So let's bring that indent back. So already we've cleaned up the code slightly and made it more readable. The compiler, of course, does not care, but we do. So it's ideally, this would probably be shifted into a whole other unit, and we'll be looking at that later. But in the meantime, usually it's just a good idea to remove your code out of events. So I'm just going to copy that and go begin end, and we'll eliminate there, and go Control-Shift-C, and that's declared a private function for us, and it will obviously do exactly as before, except now we have everything in its own procedure, which is not quite as tied to the user interface, so it makes it a little bit easier to shift. So I'm just going to initially convert this to a class procedure and see what doesn't work. So we have save listings data is not that's a we can't get to it for now, but it's another method on the unit. Obviously not a class procedure or class method. We've got this ref, and that's 1, 2, and there's another one further down, 3, and refresh dbpix, whatever that does. So making it just temporarily making it a class procedure gives you an indication as to how closely the code is tied to the class. And in this case, it's not particularly so. And in fact, all of the code, all of the data manipulation code is completely divorced from the class. So that's a good indication that it does not actually belong here. So I'm going to undo that, but this time I'm going to press Control-Shift-E, which is another Model Maker Code Explorer. No, it's not. Let's extract method. Yeah, okay, so it is edit entity, Control-E. But Control-E, and I can say it's no longer a class method. So that's a bit easier than manually editing the code. So the first thing we might want to do is let's take out all of this code into its own method. So we can go, in fact, if you look at the refactor menu, extract method is not available because I've probably got inline variables all throughout this code. Not this particular bit of code because it's quite old, but in other areas of this form. And we go extract method. And we'll give it a name. I'm going to be kind of lazy. Update data. So I'm just prefixing the new method with the old method's name, just to make it a bit easier to manage going forward. I'm going to make a class method. We already know that there's nothing in there that requires anything on the class. And rather than leave the old code as a comment, I am going to just remove it. And I think that's probably all I need to do. Hit private is good. And go OK. So now we've got our new method. Now, unfortunately, we see we've got a bunch of errors. Now, that is related to the fact that this is declared in a, in fact, if I go Control 7, Control 9, no, let's go to the top. That this class is declared in a unit, if I can find it, I'll just go search. There we go, that one. So I'm just going to shift that back up here. And I'll throw it in. It doesn't matter too much where it goes. Now, Model Maker Code Explorer also added a bunch of bookmarks, 7, 8, 9. So if I go to 7, this is kind of 7 and 8 are kind of where the original code was extracted from, and 9 is our new method. So fairly straightforward. We're going to repeat this with the downloading of the photos, which occurs in here. I'm not going to, I could extract that whole chunk there, but instead I'm just going to extract the contents of the if statement. And again, we'll get photos. Do I make it a class method now? Yeah, I might as well make it a class method. I think I can. There's going to be some errors, but I think we can fix them. And we want to remove the old code. Now, we've got a couple of errors. The first is this ref. We'll come back to that. This refresh dbpix. This kind of happens at the end. So I'll cut that. And let's go back to 7-ish. And just paste that after. So that's the first one sorted. The other issue is this ref, which didn't get picked up. I suppose it's because it's a class method. So what so this is if I control click on that, it's not working. Okay, so let's go back to 8. Might be able to control click on one of these ones that actually do. There we go. So we see that it's just referring to a field on a data module. So there's the listings table and the ref field, and DM is just a shortcut for this longer data module. It saves on a lot of typing and a lot of confusion in the code. So what I could do, so there's two options. The Control 9. The first would be to add a parameter. So if I go back, Control E, if I edit entity, I can go insert a parameter, call it ref, and it's remembered from last time I did this that I wanted it to be a constant and a string. And I can go OK, and then we'll get a missing parameter which we can put in. Or alternatively, I can just take this, copy that, do a bunch of undos. Yep, okay, so that was enough of them, and replace that with that's effectively a, I forget the refactoring name, but it's unwinding a procedure. So inline procedure, maybe, inline function, something like that. So that should probably now compile. I haven't compiled this on this machine for a while. No, but it's not related. Yeah, okay, so we won't worry about that. The issue with the T-chart and quick reports relationship, but I will fix that later. So we have done extract method a couple of times. Our procedure is now a lot smaller, and if we look up, we'll see that there is a bunch of, I was hoping we'd see them a bit more obviously than that. I need to do some cleaning up some of those warnings. But if I come back here, we could probably remove a bunch of these. I'd say Floria land area and so on. But we're not getting the warnings because of the error in the code. I don't normally develop this application on this machine, and I've obviously made a few changes that I might need to just double check the version control. But in that particular error is about scope of units. So moving on, that's our new method is now almost fits on a single screen. It might well do if we get rid of some more of these variables that are no longer needed. So search price region listing ref. Oh no, we need listing ref. Search price and region can go. And prefix, no, the state. Success, and that's still used. So very, very close to being on a single screen. In fact, normally this would be a single screen because I've increased the font and I'm running it 1080p rather than 4K. So in that last section, we extracted two methods. The first was the data manipulation code, and the second was the downloading of photos. So we started with a large method, and we found how that was sort of divided up. We sort of found three sections, and we extracted two of those sections out into their own methods. And as stated here, the sum of the parts is often simpler than the whole. So a method that is twice as large is often more than twice as complicated. So if you can divide that into two methods, often the complexity goes down, or at least the ability to understand the code is improved. So next up, we're going to be moving a method between classes. So if we now take a look at the download from realestate.co update data, we see really it's a class method, so it doesn't really need to be in listing inquiry, and pretty much every single line of code accesses the data module. So that's probably a reasonable place to shift it to. And if we go into the data module, we see that this is just a function, which is a shortcut for this data module we get, which unsurprisingly contains a lot of data sets. Now, what we want to do is shift our get update data procedure. And what we can do is I just go back up to the top and copy the list signature without the class bit. Control V and Control Shift C. And we're missing our T realestate.co advert getter unit. Getter. And so that's now fine. And basically we just want to copy and paste or cut and paste the contents of the procedure. Like so. And we see we have lots of errors, but they're all basically the same error. So I'm just going to highlight that, go Control R, and replace the M dot with nothing. And magically all our errors go away. Now, if we go back to listing inquiry, we need to call that in here. So we call dm dot like so, and probably compile and test at this point. And I fixed my errors. Let's terminate that, and I might go back to the more code layout. And so effectively we've finished this, but what I'm going to do is take that, I'll cut it and replace that one. Can I go back? No. And delete that line and delete that definition. So that's pretty much tidied up. And let's double check that it doesn't decompile. I did in fact fix my error from earlier, which was related to a unit scoping issue related to t-chart. Okay, so that was our first shift method, and we'll take a look at the next one. So we wanted to shift a method between classes from the form to the data module, because basically the contents were more related to the data module than the form. And so we did this in a number of steps. We created the new method on the data module, and then we shifted the contents. And we pointed the old method at the new method, at which point we could do a lot of testing. And then we could call the new method everywhere it's used. In this case, there's only one location, so that was fairly straightforward, and delete the old method. We're going to repeat this exercise, but there's going to be a slight complication. And we're going to have to use extract interface and inject dependency. So we're going to use method injection. Next up, we want to shift our download from realestate.co with the get photos. So we're going to shift that to the data module as well. So if we have a close look at that, we see we've got this T multi-threaded downloader. If I control click on that, we can see it's a VCL form with a list of files queued up, those that are downloading and those that have been completed. So I do not want to have a form referenced from a data module. In practice you can do it, but my feeling is that this would make this data module now non-portable. At the moment I could shift it to an Android application or iOS or whatever, but as soon as I start referencing VCL forms, that's going to stop that portability in its tracks. So what we need to do is somehow abstract out this form. Now we could do it with like passing in an anonymous method or all sorts of, there's lots of ways of doing it. But what we're going to do is we're going to extract an interface. So if we come down to across to the multi-threaded downloader, we see we've got two methods, webGetFiles and webGetFile. I'm not sure if this is particularly useful. Is it downloading a single file is in a multi-threaded fashion is not necessarily any faster, but that one we definitely do want to shift or make use of, because that's the method that's being used, the webGetFiles. So we're creating the form and then we're downloading images, and it's automatically freed in the on close. On close, we see that our action is CA free. And again, this code is probably pretty old. I haven't actually checked how old this one's, probably around 10 years old. So what we want to do is we'll go to our multi-threaded downloader and we want to extract an interface. Now, I want to make a code explorer. I'll just shift this off to the side, but not dock it. We have down the bottom two methods, and from those I want to extract an interface. If I can remember how to do it, here we go, extract interface. And we will call it my ancestor interface. That'll do for now. And we should really need an interface, an ancestor for it. And I'm going to take that, just shove it up here for now. And it's helpfully added system.classes, which is already present. that reference. And I can make this form implement that interface. And again, shift that to the side. So we now have an interface, and this form is implementing that interface. So what we need to do is create a new unit. And I can call it multi-threaded downloader interface. Copy that. Add that to the users. So we have at the top. Now I can take this out. Throw it in here, and of course we need them dot classes because we've got string lists. I wonder if that and see if those are actually errors. Nope. Okay. It's probably that I haven't saved the unit that it's complaining. So next up, we want to change our method signature so that it creates it uses probably throw that unit. Let's just put a mark there, and it'll need to go up the top somewhere. There will do. In fact, why don't I just save that? There will do. Ignore the automated testing. They're a bit, rather lacking in this project. Okay, so that error's gone away. And we want to come back to this, add another parameter, multi-threaded downloader. I'm multi-threaded downloader. Control-Shift-P to add that in there. And at this point, I want to change this to mtd dot with get files. Shift that. Okay. So we want to go back to where that is being called from. And no, that didn't work. Let's go up. Download from Rico. And we want to pass in. We can create. How lazy do I want to be? I think that'll work. So, because the form automatically frees itself when it closes, that should be fine. The forms don't implement add ref and release in terms of reference counting. So, because we're passing it in as part of interface, you might expect that it might automatically get freed as part of the reference counting, but that's not the case in this instance. So, I think this is okay. We'll find out. And so we can just, I might give that a quick compile and make sure I've done things correctly. Normally you'd be testing at every step to make sure that everything is okay, and that compiles just fine. So now our download photos from realestate.co no longer reference a form. So that's now platform independent. We can now shift this quite happily to our data module and not corrupt the multi-platformness of the application. Not that this particular thing is multi-platform, but this unit could be. And I think just referencing forms from data modules is bad anyway. It tends to lend itself very quickly to becoming quite convoluted code with lots of dependency cycles. which can be very hard on the compiler, very memory intensive. Now, so let's come back to listing inquiry, and let's copy that signature, and it's still going to be a class. We can still make it a class method. Oh, we can copy it from the top though. Come to our data module. So normally I wouldn't shift this, but I just need the example. So we can implement that class and also add multi-threaded downloaded form, and for some reason our interface is not being listed there. So let's copy that. Okay, that should get rid of all the errors, and we should be now copy the code quite happily from listing inquiry, that one. So I'll do my same trick. Begin end and VM dot. Like so, and all of this can now come across to the data module and paste it in. Okay, we can get rid of the DM. We still have this check for pick. Oh, okay. We don't want to make a class method, so I'll just go Control E and remove that. Okay, so we're now missing a unit, and remember which one it is, but let's go up. I know that it's one of two. My processing might be cross-platform. Yep. Okay. So that's our code shifted. That was a little bit convoluted, but hopefully it's illustrated a number of refactoring techniques, such as the extract interface. Interfaces are very important for dependency inversion. You can do it in other ways. I've used anonymous methods in the past as well to eliminate dependencies, in particular dependency cycles, and it can make the code a lot cleaner. It does make it a little bit harder to follow and debug, but increases the portability of the code quite considerably and the testability. So that's pretty much the example here. So let's move on. And just lastly, we can have a look at the code running. And if we go to the Internet tab and go download from realestate.co, and you see we want to overwrite, we can see it's downloading the photos and has updated the listing. Although I've done this several times now, so it's not actually changed anything. And have a look at the photos. Okay, so oops. Okay, there's a little bit of debugging I need to have a look there. That might be the background thread for looking for an update. Okay, so that's all I want to cover. Let's move on to the end of the presentation. So that last example was a little bit convoluted, but effectively we wanted to shift the photo download method to the data module, but it had a form in it, and well, a VCL form, and we don't want to reference forms from data modules. Generally speaking, I generally always want the reference to be in the reverse, always from a form to a data module, never a data module to a form. And so we extracted an interface from that form, and we passed that interface into the new method. That's dependency injection, method injection, and or even the extracting interface is effectively it's a dependency inversion. And now both the form and data module depend on the interface, but not on each other. So that code is far more portable and easier to shift around. And of course, test if we wanted to go down that route, because we could pass in a mock or a fake or something like that, or in the testing code. So where can you learn more about refactoring? Well, obviously, the Refactoring book by Martin Fowler. I can't recommend that book enough. It is brilliant. The examples are either in Java or JavaScript, depending on what edition you buy. The newer edition is in JavaScript. And there's a lot on refactoring.com, which gives you a little bit of an overview, but the actual methodology, you have to buy the book for that. But there's a huge amount. If you just Google refactoring, there's a lot of information on how to do it. I'd also recommend working effectively with Legacy Code by Michael Feathers. Another excellent book I've read a couple of times. It has a lot on how to refactor your code to enable testing, which is effectively what that book is about. I'd also recommend Delphi Legacy Projects. There's not a lot on refactoring in that book, but there's a lot with working out strategies for dealing with legacy code in Delphi. These two books, of course, are not related to Delphi at all, but obviously Delphi Legacy Projects and my new book, which may or may not be out by the time you watch this, Code Better in Delphi. And this is just a working cover page. It might change from that. So thanks for watching. You can always get my current book, Code Faster in Delphi, if you're looking to be more productive. And also I have lots of training videos on my website, learndelphi.tv. If you get the mega pack, it's over 30-something hours of content. It's a ridiculous amount of video to watch, but it's got a lot of detail on the VCL and client datasets and generic collections and various other bits and pieces. So thanks for watching. I'm Alister from learndelphi.tv. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation.
All right, great. Thank you, Alister, for that session. There's always a lot of great information in there. Looks like you're still on. You want to come on if we can do some Q&A here?
Hello.
Hello. I'm glad you're talking about refactoring. It's an important topic.
Yeah, especially in sort of enterprise stuff. The large enterprise projects tend to be, decades-long type endeavors, and end up having lots and lots of code in them that is, when you get lots of people working on a project over many years, it becomes quite convoluted. So it helps a lot to be able to manipulate that code in efficient ways.
Okay, so questions here. Sorry, I got distracted. Something popped up on my screen. Alf said...
Always multitasking there.
I always thought that if I worked at Embarcadero, it'd be great because I could just enjoy all the content. But it's like, if anything, it's like I'm expected to work when there's webinars going on. It's probably important to only comment out the original code in order to get back in the original bad code in case used any place in different programs if you're working in parallel.
Okay, that might be that if you've got like a project group with lots of projects in it, then you can have lots of shared code. And so, if you're doing refactoring in one project, it might break another. So it's something you need to be aware of. And of course, version control is the the solution to get back anything that's broken. So definitely you should be using at least Subversion, if not Git.
Yeah, generally commenting out code, and if you disagree with me, that's fine. But generally I would say that you comment out code only temporarily, or if you like sometimes if you had occasionally I uncomment this code to use, actually then I probably use a compiler directive to do that. I think commented out code is a code smell.
It is.
That's something you should not have in your code.
I occasionally have little bits of code for debugging. I might have a copy to the clipboard or something like that, which I might leave in just for convenience. But usually if it's actual, you've got a block of code there that's commented out, you should probably just delete it and rely on version control to get it back if you need it.
And if you're not using version control, like Alister's, what's that?
I was saying 99 times out of 100, you'll never need to use that code again. Yes.
Yagna. Yeah, but if you're not using version control, at least use Subversion. Although Git and GitHub is really easy. You can get free private repositories on GitHub now, or
Yeah,
there's
and
GitLab and
Bitbucket as well.
others for Bitbucket.
Yeah, if you're anti-Microsoft or something like that.
Yeah, and the advantage of using cloud-based source control is offsite backup as well.
Yeah, it's actually really huge. Here in New Zealand, we had a big earthquake in Christchurch back in 2011. There's a couple of them, 2010 and 2011. But it was interesting that a lot of businesses shifted their data to the cloud after that, because they had situations where they'd have servers and things like that sitting in a building. The building was still intact, but they weren't allowed to go in and retrieve those computers because that wasn't safe, and the buildings got demolished with all that hardware still in them. So having stuff offsite and even in a different city is very sensible.
Yeah. I worked with someone that did not want to use cloud, but they kept having all these hardware failures, and they finally switched to cloud, and they're like, I should have done this years ago. Why was I resistant? But anyway, that's another topic for another day. So I know we're getting really close on your new book. You mentioned you hoped it would be out by now.
Yeah, still not quite finished. Very, very close to finished. My wife's doing an edit through proofread. It's been proofread by lots of people so far, and so the content it's very, very, very little redundancy in it. So it's very information dense.
Good. And I know, actually, I was writing the forward, and I saw there was a feedback on that, and I haven't gone back through that yet, but I will go back through the changes on the forward.
Yeah. I did a very cursory edit on it, and then my wife went through and she's very, very particular about grammar and what have you. So
good. I actually had a couple other changes I want to make on it too. So
okay,
I'll do a merge. Ian pointed out zip files are not version control. This is so true. Yeah. So if you're using zip files or copying, and I've done this, right? I've used the zip files. I've used making a copy of my directory. I've used emailing the source control or the source code between different developers. All of those are not source control. There's really not any excuses not to be using source control. If you're really paranoid about using cloud-based source control, you can have a local server, but make sure you do have offsite backups. But
I do.
Version control is way better.
Yeah, in the book I do a local Subversion repository, an example with that. That's probably the easiest to set up if you want to, particularly if you want to have version control between two different machines. So that'd be the kind of minimum level of redundancy you should have. And of course, version control is just not just backing up. It's all that flexibility of branching and just as the ease with which you can revert changes and what have you improves your workflow considerably.
Well, and then when you have version control attached to a ticketing system, your changes, right? Then you can say, when something's not working, and you pointed out blame, right? So they can say, wait, when did this last work? Oh, it last worked here. Oh, I was fixing this bug, and that bug also affected these files here. Okay, now I can see where things went. And Kirk just said, GExperts has a project. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, GExperts does have a project backup.
But that's still not version control.
Indeed. I'm not sure if I think it only does stuff you reference in your project. I'm not sure if it does any extra units that are in to the library paths and things like that.
Version control is huge, and even if you're a developer team of 0 or 1, then you still should be using version control. A lot of people are like, I don't have a big team.
Even non-developers like DBAs and people like that can have their bits of SQL and all that kind of stuff, and if you're doing DevOps, all your infrastructure scripts and things like that.
Writing documentation, whatever it is. Yep.
Yeah.
Ian says, when you live in Tornado Alley, you get really passionate about offsite backups. Generally is that there are people that back up, or people that, there's people that make backups and people that will regret not making backups. Is the two classes.
Yeah. And one backup is generally not enough as well. It's good to have a backup history, and also an offsite backup of some kind, because, big disasters happen. Earthquakes, tsunamis, fires, tornadoes. They can wipe out possibly not just your machine, but any other machines in your building. Yeah, where I worked.
An absolute minimum. You need to have source control and offsite backup. But then, depending on your threat model, you might want to have multiple offsite backups in different locations and whatever. But we do need to switch over now.
Okay. All right.
Real quick. Okay.
Yep. Good.
All right. Thank you so much, Alister. Really appreciate it, and looking forward to your new book. You put out great work. So check it out. LearnDelphi.tv. If you don't have Alister's first book, get that one, and then get his new book when it comes out very shortly here.